who is to blame for harm to animals. And what I'm going to look at is what sociology can add to this discussion, and also look at how these ideas can be relevant to debates amongst activists in the movement. But I guess to start off, I wanted to just mention, just sort of building off Zoe's talk, and it's weird at a Zoom conference where I'm looking at Zoe, but it doesn't mean anything. I'm just being a slightly different point on the screen. But anyway, with Zoe's talk, this idea of sociology for animals, and thinking about how our companion animals probably don't enjoy our sociology for animals too much. I know my dog doesn't enjoy it too much when I'm sitting in front of the screen doing my work. And just to give an example of that, if I can, that is my dog Penny, protesting me doing my sociology for animals, and she's not too happy about that. And then a few minutes after, my other dog Moo Moo joined her as well, and we had a 2-dog protest against me doing my sociology for animals. So I just wanted to note that to start things off, that talk about sociology for animals, but our companion animals don't necessarily appreciate it too much. They'd prefer me sitting on the couch and watching the footy or something like that. So I wanted to mention that. Also, to start things off before I get into it, I wanted to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'm in Melbourne, as you can see behind me with a tropical background. I'm sure you know exactly where I am. Nice, sunny, warm Melbourne. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, any Aboriginal elders who may be looking in today. So I just wanted to just build on that acknowledgement a little bit. This isn't going to be a huge part of my talk, but definitely something I'd like to, look into, try and incorporate into my work as I go on. Was an article I recently saw in actually an anthropology unit I was teaching by Zoei Todd, an Indigenous feminist take on the ontological turn. Ontology is just another word for colonialism. That is in the Journal of Historical Sociology. And it's a really interesting article talking about the lack of Indigenous perspectives in academic work, which looks at the ontological turn, basically this idea that other animals are also beings, they're sentient, and these sort of dualisms that we break down in these kind of areas. So I just wanted to just acknowledge that. Again, it's not something I'm going to be able to include in this presentation, but in Todd's work, she lists about 20 or 30 Indigenous scholars who we could look at who do contribute to this discussion, but sometimes theorists in this area kind of act as though we're coming up with something new, whereas, Indigenous scholars often broke down that, or Indigenous people, Indigenous scholars specifically, often did and do break down these dualisms, and also view other animals as sentient, which is sort of a core part of what we're doing. So I wanted to just touch on something which is the structure and agency debate in sociology, which is probably something that we're, most of us as sociologists be fairly aware of. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I do notice that my friend Adam, who's already come up earlier from the sciences, not sociology, is here. And I'm sure there might be a few other people watching online who aren't sociologists, but hopefully we'll get something out of our ideas. And so I will briefly go through like what structure and agency are before I get into how this can apply to debates in the animal movement. And I wanted to start off with an example I often give when I'm teaching my classes, which is how I'm dressed, which is a strange example right now because you can only see my head. My camera is very in your face, or very in my face, I guess. But it's unfortunate because I'm wearing my best track pants today. So you're missing out on that. But I just think about like the way I'm dressed, for example, which is a fairly like normative for a man, basically, and the way in which like, if we're emphasizing agency, you'd say I chose to wear the clothes that I chose to wear today. No one had a gun to my head. There was no law I was going to break if I wore a dress, for example. But when we look at the structures, we look at all the bigger things, bigger than the individual, which influence my individual choice to wear what I wore. And the punishments, the social punishments I might get if I go against the norms of society. So if I chose to wear a dress to work, for example, there have been men who have been fired for wearing wearing a dress to work, for example. So I don't want to wear a dress. I'm making that choice, but it's very hard to differentiate that choice from the punishments I might get if I go against the social norms, the social structures, the gender norms in this case. So we often sort of internalize the value of society, and that's where I guess we often talk about this like as like a binary things, but as we develop, we talk about it as more of like a circular kind of a relationship, in that we sort of are influenced by society. And even when we are looking at agency and individual choice, our individual choice is shaped by society. And if I was in a different society and different place in time, I might be dressed differently, might make different decisions, etc. So that's sort of structure and agency in a nutshell. This sort of interplay between the individuals and the society they're in, with agency emphasizing individual choice and individual capacity to go against the social structures, and social structures being all the factors, the bigger factors beyond the individual. So I wanted to just, just apply that debate to just some debates around animal issues in our society, and just give a couple of different perspectives from within the movement. So I want to first of all mention Gary Francione's position, and I guess argue that this very much is a focus on individual agency. So Francione makes a point like, yes, we've got this advertising telling us to consume animals, but we can as individuals choose not to do that, basically. And also this supply and demand model as individuals, that if less people eat animals, buy animal products, etc., that demand will drop. So the sort of the role of individuals in the economy, in shaping the economy. And I think that is a valuable perspective. And I think his perspective is probably the dominant one in the movement when it comes to discussions about veganism. And again, I think it is valuable to try and do what we can as individuals and do assert that individual agency. But I'd argue that it doesn't tell the whole picture. And that's where sociology comes in, particularly that there's more focus on structures. And so I remember discussing that model with Anthony Nacella, who's one of the founders of the Institute for Critical Animal Studies, which I'm a part of here in Oceania. And he was saying, no, like individuals don't create the demand for animal products. It's actually corporations that create the demand. So sort of flipping that round and pointing out those structural considerations that also play a role in harming animals. It's not just individuals buying the wrong products. And David Nibert, an animal sociologist, has referred to it being socially engineered demand. So yeah, again, it's not individuals just choosing to buy animals and animal products in a nutshell, in a vacuum, but it's influenced by advertising, it's influenced by availability, etc. Another thing that Anthony Nacella pointed out, problems with this model is, again, thinking about structural considerations, is that under capitalism, there's inequalities, economic inequalities, and therefore there can be socio-economic barriers to veganism. So when we purely focus on agency and just everyone should not buy animal products and be vegan, we might overlook that some people have more agency, some people have more choice, in the products they buy than others, depending on whether maybe they're living in a remote area, maybe they're living in a low socio-economic area that may have a lot of fast food restaurants, but not too much access to healthy vegan food and fresh produce and all those kind of things as well. So I just wanted to just sort of add that in, that again, I think these structural considerations are quite important when we're considering who is to blame for harm to animals. Now I do have a video. I'm not sure if I've got time for it. Maybe I can check in with Gavin. How far have I gone so far? Am I 5 minutes in or 10 minutes in?
You are 10 minutes in.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
I think
on. Yeah.
Oh no. Yeah, I am. Yep. Okay. I think I will skip the video and I'll just mention the video. Anyone can look it up if you like. But this was a video from the show Adam Ruins Everything. It's just a little 2-minute thing. And it was basically looking at why is there so much cheese consumed in the US. And the reason isn't so much that individuals are choosing to eat cheese, but it's actually to do with he goes into it, but like all this leftover cheese, which was to do with like the US government and dairy companies, etc. So again, the reason there's so much cheese in the US isn't necessarily an individual issue, or at least predominantly, but it has to do with these broader structural factors such as governments, corporations, etc., who again, I think we also need to consider. And again, this sort of structural focus of sociology, I think, can add to these debates in the animal movement. So yeah, I'm going to finish up with a little case study of how we can apply these ideas to activist movements. And I'm going to focus specifically on environmental activism, specifically environmental vegan activism. So people encouraging people to eat a plant-based diet for environmental reasons. And one thing I've noticed from the vegan contingents at these climate marches, which I've been a part of many times over the years, is that we often promote what I'd call a hypocrisy narrative. And this was in the top left there, you can see the biggest banner I saw at a recent climate rally, which was how can we expect change from others when we refuse to change ourselves? So this idea, you're talking about Adani coal mine, you're talking about the government doing this, but you're not doing enough as individuals because you're not vegan. And at the same time, seeing this banner, I think this was a climate rally in 2019, I was seeing a lot of commentary from right-wing and climate-denying commentators that were actually kind of fairly similar to the vegan messaging. They're basically saying, all of you environmental activists, you're all hypocrites because you're having an environmental impact and yet you're marching for the environment. And I guess I saw that as a very anti-activism position, because the argument is basically, if you have any kind of impact on the environment, you shouldn't be protesting. We're always going to have some kind of an impact, so therefore no one protests. I think, to me, seemed to be the sort of the arguments around the commentary. So rather than marching, we should be not using plastic water bottles. We should be walking to school, if they, in the case of kids, not using air conditioning, all these things which are good things. But I don't think we should say because people are not doing these things, they shouldn't be out protesting. And I think we can do both, highlight Adani coal mine, push for government changes, and also try and do what we can as individuals. And interestingly, over in the UK as well, I saw people saying, well, these people are Extinction Rebellion environmental protesters, and yet they're going to McDonald's. So this is this idea, this focus on the individual, which again, I think maybe has an emphasis too much in the individual direction. So what I did when I went to the most recent climate rally I went to is I brought along some placards, which basically sort of bring in sociology and also bring in messaging from environmental movements, which are often quite broadly structured, often focus on these structural things, not purely individual change. And I've applied them to animal agriculture. So the demands of the school strike for climate, no new coal, oil and gas projects, including the Adani mine, 100% renewable energy generation and exports by 2030, and fund a just transition and job creation for all fossil fuel workers and communities. And so I basically, the banners that I brought along were basically using that exact same structural messaging, not so much individual change, but applying it to animal agriculture. So no new animal agriculture, 100% plant-based agriculture by 2030, and a just transition for all animal agricultural workers. And so I kind of thought of this in terms of the climate marches. We've got all people there who have various levels of environmental impact, and obviously the less environmental impact you have as individuals, the better. Again, those who aren't driving cars, those who aren't doing those kind of individual actions, but nevertheless, they can all agree on those sort of structural demands. And I thought the same with animal agriculture. Again, people might all be consuming animals to different degree. And again, the less, the better. Again, I think vegan is obviously the best thing to do on the individual level, but nevertheless, hopefully we can all agree on those structural demands on animal agriculture, which does have a significant environmental impact. And I guess just to finish up on a positive note, in my view anyway, there's a picture there from the most recent environmental rally I went to, where I brought along those signs. And actually, I'm not sure how we can see that, but actually the messaging had changed a bit from the vegan contingent of this march in Melbourne, where there was still, individuals advocating for veganism on the individual level, which I think is a positive thing. I think there's no reason why we can't also include individual messaging, but there was also that much broader structural messaging of a plant-based food system and phasing out animal agriculture, as opposed to vegan contingents at these marches, which I'd seen in the past, which are very much focusing on purely encouraging individuals to go vegan. So again, I think that's already occurring, but I think sociology does have something that can contribute to those kind of discussions in terms of bringing in that structural impact. So yeah, I just wanted to also in the questions ask whatever you like, but I am keen to write an academic article on this at some point. And one article which is really, I've already read, which is really useful on this topic is Corey Wren's article, How to Help When It Hurts, Think Systemic. That was a really relevant article, sort of breaking down that supply and demand model, which is so dominant in the vegan movement, that if we consume like 10 less serves of meat or dairy or whatever, there'll be 10 less animals killed, those kind of things, which obviously we should do what we can as individuals, but it's not that simple. There are these bigger factors at play, which I've hopefully got across in this talk. Also, if anyone's interested in my publications, are all on my conversation profile. Follow me on Twitter. And also I have a radio show. I'm one of the hosts of the radio show, Freedom of Species, when you find it 3cr.org.au/freedom of species. We've had Zoei, Corey Wren, Roger Yates, who's speaking. We've had Melissa Lang, who's here as well. So a bunch of the people here at this conference we've had on that show before. So yeah, I will make way for some questions.
Thanks, Nick. Fantastic presentation. And we've got just about 3 or 4 minutes for maybe 1 or 2 max questions. If you could maybe just stop sharing your screen, Nick, that'd be great, just so we can see. Perfect. Excellent. Okay, who would like to ask Nick a question? Yep, Zoe.
I'll jump in. I'm not going to tell a long story, but I know I've been at previous conferences and I had someone who was one of the kind of higher up of the Extinction Rebellion organization who said to me that we couldn't talk about veganism within the movement because veganism was a blame and shame movement, and so that wouldn't enter into discussions. I'm really interested in how do we communicate that it is a structural issue, but we also need to take it seriously, because I think sometimes appealing to structure is a way of distancing ourselves from veganism.
Yeah, I think that, and I was often thinking that, and I guess I was also thinking, like, when we have these environmental marches, they don't, for example, say, like, no one who drove a car to the climate march can be a part of it, right? So there is that real move away from the individual. So yeah, I mean, I think that is where they're coming from the blame and shame. And I just wonder, yeah, again, I think a lot of people in environmental movements do separately have those discussions and think about those issues on the individual, like, can I get rid of my car, or can I drive less, and those kind of things. And I think they are really important. And again, I think that agency, the individual, is definitely part of the story. As sociologists, we try and focus on both. But yeah, I would just wonder, like, just thinking about the opposition to veganism, again, is it so much the opposition to, like, actually addressing the issue of animal agriculture, or is it more the way we frame our arguments? So I guess thinking about that as vegan advocates within environmental movements, thinking about, whereas, like, they're not taking this seriously, but then I was more thinking, like, how can we frame our arguments to be more in line with the existing messaging, which may be more inclusive, I guess, like more inclusive. So again, hopefully, I'd love to see, demands like 100% plant-based agriculture. Could that be a part of these things, a part of these movements? And that doesn't necessarily have to mean that everyone within those movements is vegan or has to be part of veganism, but we can also have that discussion too. But yeah, I guess think about, like, reframing our message to be more structural, more inclusive, while also encourage that individual change.
Thanks, Nick. I think we probably have to, sadly, I mean, we could discuss all of these topics and issues and papers more, but I think we probably have to move on and keep on our pretty rigid schedule. So thank you so much again, Nick. That was a really great talk, and nice way segue into our last speaker of the session. Some clapping hands.